a 120-year-old dam nearly collapsed, not because of the storm, but because officials knew for 48 years it would fail in exactly this moment and did nothing. When the spillway breached, 500 gallons per second flooded drowning towns. This wasn't a natural disaster, it was a choice. The sequence began on March 10th, when meteorological conditions aligned in a way that would reshape the conversation about Hawaiian infrastructure. A Kona low, a subtropical cyclone that reverses the island's normal weather patterns, moved northwest of the island chain and stalled. It did not pass. For 6 consecutive days, a massive plume of tropical moisture remained locked directly over the islands, feeding rain continuously into every valley and basin. By the time the system weakened, the measurement stations had documented something extraordinary. Oahu's highest peak recorded over 26 inches. Maui's summit gauge measured nearly 50 inches. In Honolulu, a daily rainfall record that had stood for 75 years shattered. Wind gusts on the Big Island reached 135 miles per hour. Every official weather station in the state recorded a new maximum. More significantly, every square inch of soil across the island chain had reached complete saturation, meaning the ground could absorb no additional water. This was the condition when the second system arrived. Thursday night, March 19th, 9 days after the first Kona low had begun, a second subtropical cyclone developed. At 3:42 in the morning on Friday, the Honolulu Department of Emergency Management sent its first alert. By 4:30 a.m., instruments upstream showed the Wahiawa Dam's water level had climbed from 79 feet to within inches of the critical threshold. At 5:35 a.m., the city issued an imminent failure notice. At 8 o'clock, the National Weather Service elevated its designation to flash flood emergency, a classification with language almost never deployed. To understand the geography of this collision, understand first where Oahu sits. The island occupies the center of the Pacific Ocean, approximately 2,400 miles from the nearest continent, making it an isolated system in which water has nowhere to run except downward into narrow channels. The North Shore stretches along the island's northern coast facing open ocean. Behind it, 2 mountain ranges, the Waianae and Kulauf, form a natural funnel system that directs rainfall down into low-lying plains. The towns of Waialua and Halewa occupy that drainage path on flat terrain between mountains and sea. They are positioned directly in the path where water from the higher elevations concentrates and accelerates. Upstream from these towns sits the Wahiawa Dam and Lake Wilson, which holds over 3 billion gallons of water. The reservoir's position creates a second dynamic. In normal conditions, it regulates flow. In extreme conditions, it becomes a pressure system that can amplify downslope flooding rather than mitigate it. When that structure reaches capacity during heavy rainfall, its release mechanisms determine whether downslope communities receive a steady outflow or a surge. The affected area includes 2 major routes, Farrington Highway and Kamehameha Highway, that represent the only road access to the North Shore. When water blocks both routes, evacuation becomes impossible. Residents cannot drive out. Rescue becomes helicopter dependent. What happens next depends entirely on how quickly water rises once those routes disappear. The Wahiawa Dam was constructed in 1906 from earth and rock. Not concrete, not steel, but soil and stone compacted together. This construction method served well for agricultural purposes in the early 20th century, when it existed primarily to irrigate sugarcane fields for the Dole Food Company. It was rebuilt after a failure in 1921, and by modern standards, that foundation method has inherent limitations. The dam stands 88 feet tall. Its spillway, the engineered channel designed to safely release excess water during heavy rain events, is the critical vulnerability. Since 1978, state regulators have officially documented that this spillway is undersized for extreme rainfall. That is not a recent discovery. That is 48 consecutive years of documented knowledge. Between 2009 and the present, the state issued 4 formal deficiency notices. The company received correspondence explaining that the structure could not handle the precipitation patterns that would eventually arrive. When rain intensity exceeds spillway capacity, water begins to back up. As the reservoir level rose on Friday morning, instruments measured the dam's water level, climbing toward the 84-foot evacuation trigger. The spillway breached this threshold at 80 feet, forcing the dam to release 500 gallons per second into the communities downstream. This discharge rate did not occur in isolation. It compounded with the continuous rain falling on already saturated ground. The combination created dual flooding, water rising from above through spillway discharge, and water accumulating from surface rainfall that could not infiltrate soil already at saturation capacity. Towns received both simultaneously from both directions. Rochelle Ashew, a farmer in Waialua and member of the North Shore Neighborhood Board, experienced the sequence directly. Thursday night, she discovered her goat standing in knee-high water. 1 hour later, the water level in her elevated dog kennel had risen so rapidly that her 7 dogs were submerged to their heads. She and her family members charged into chest-high water in total darkness to extract them. The speed of the rising water eliminated the option of planning. Only reaction remained. Across the North Shore, families woke to emergency sirens with minutes to decide what to carry and where to go. Waialaha High School, designated as an emergency shelter, opened its doors to residents seeking safety. By early morning, 186 people and 45 dogs occupied the facility. The building then began to flood, forcing a second evacuation. Rescuers transported people who had fled their homes to find shelter, only to evacuate that shelter minutes later. An emergency shelter became an evacuation point itself. The National Guard deployed Black Hawk helicopters to extract 72 children from a spring break camp surrounded by rising water. Over the course of the event, rescue operations pulled 236 people directly from rooftops and high ground. The boil water advisory that followed covered the entire North Shore because destroyed homes had released sewage into floodwater, contaminating every water system. On Waimanalo Country Farms, 78 years of continuous operation, every growing season since 1948, was destroyed in a single night. The Oahu flood was not the system's only pressure point. On Maui, the same storm tested a different wound, and one with deeper historical context. In August 2023, a wildfire swept through Lahaina, killing 101 people and destroying an entire town. The fire-scared landscape created a second vulnerability. Terrain stripped of vegetation sheds water far faster than intact ground. Burned earth channels rainfall into streams and low-lying areas with increased velocity. The communities that burned become the communities most vulnerable to flooding in the next heavy rain event. During the March flooding, retention basins on Maui began approaching capacity. Crews pumped water through the night. Evacuation warnings went out for neighborhoods in Waikuli and Li'ali'i, the same streets where residents had lost everything to fire months earlier. The cycle had compressed. Fire in August, flood in March, different destruction. The statewide flood watch extended through Sunday. Meteorologists at the National Weather Service issued explicit warnings against complacency. The saturation remained, the rain forecast remained, the system was still moving. What happens next? The state's deadline to acquire the dam from Dole Food Company is June 30th of this year. Legislation passed in 2023 authorized $5 billion to purchase spillway repairs and $21 million for total reconstruction. That timeline assumes funding, authorization, and completion without delay. In the interim, a portable water-filled barrier was installed on the dam's crest to temporarily extend its height to 90 feet. This barrier, essentially a temporary sandbag structure, is what stood between 3 billion gallons of water and the flooded communities below during the peak of the event. It is not a permanent solution. It is a temporary measure while the permanent transfer of ownership and repair remains in bureaucratic process. The question is not whether the worst has passed. The question is what occurs the next time saturation conditions align with heavy precipitation. The time after that, and every season thereafter, as long as a 120-year-old structure rated in poor condition remains the only mechanism between a reservoir and the communities in its shadow. Open questions. How many weather systems must test this structure before failure becomes statistical inevitability rather than scenario? Why does a 48-year-old documented safety deficiency remain unfixed heading into the season when tropical systems form? And when the state finally takes control by June, will the repairs be completed before the next atmospheric condition aligns in precisely this way again?